Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Firewall, the business bytecast, where tech beats business. Get expert insights and real-world business leaders, IT experts, and the latest trends in bite-sized episodes. Stay ahead and explore what's beyond the firewall. And welcome back, everybody, to Beyond the Firewall, where we bring you the latest information about technology, business leaders, and everything else that's going on out there. So today, I'm very fortunate enough to bring another incredible business leader, Keith Young. Keith, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me today. Yes, my name is Keith Young. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and I, in many circles, am backup guy. I didn't actually set out in backup, though. I got pulled into it because I was watching businesses lose everything and realizing it was far too late when recovery wasn't even a subject at that point. Early in my career, felt like it was a checkbox in many cases. We tape it, we disk it, we move on. And suddenly ransomware hit. Didn't creep up on us either. It was sudden and it was fast. And it wasn't about storing data anymore. It was actually about surviving that impact. So today I'm working with MSPs globally, and the pattern seems to be the same everywhere I go. Everyone thinks they're protected until they have to prove it. And that gap of feeling safe and being recoverable, that's where I live right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I find that always, one of those things that people never really think about till it's too late, and then it's always about scramble mode and,
Yeah.
and then they thought they had what they needed. And I'm always intrigued in seeing how the perception around that goes. And, when a customer out there is looking or a business out there is looking at, kind of strategizing around that, what would you say is that business survival conversation when it comes into a breach? Like, what is it, that 60-second journey?
So a lot of individual businesses, they're thinking about data protection, about just having backups. And really, it's not. How fast can you recover? What can you recover? And what businesses are going to survive that gap? And the part they're actually kind of missing is backup success doesn't equal recovery success. And sort of like sometimes we would think like activity doesn't equal progress. You feel good because you're busy and you got it done. And right now, a lot of companies, they're walking that sort of false line between safety and security. And
Right.
it's a dangerous tightrope in some examples because I backed it up doesn't mean I can recover.
Right. And I think a lot of companies out there are more focused on I call it the offense, in the sense that I've got, cybersecurity, I got firewalls, I got, an MDR, I've got all these cyber services that are supposed to protect me from that. But, the backup has now become the new forgotten child or the misfit of conversations here. Like, nobody has done a proper, continuity plan in quite some time. And I'm really intrigued by how that's kind of slipped through the cracks, So,
Yeah.
and I'm always challenged and I always hear about this, from business owners is, I thought I have a backup. I thought I have, I'm good, but from what I know out there, traditional backup is no longer relative. It's just like saying the old antivirus from 10 years ago. Nobody sells an old fashioned antivirus. So what's changed in the sense of that whole traditional backup to today's standards?
That's a good point. Traditional backup was built for failure, not attack. And it assumed a lot of things. It assumed that systems will fail and data loss is accidental. And it also assumed that we had time. Ransomware doesn't play by those rules. I'm going to say ransomware because that's sort of that modern attack vector that everyone is talking about. And we know that ransomware is fast. It's targeted and it's designed to break recovery systems. One thing that I learned about that type of attack too is once they control the backups, they also control your fall. And that fall is your recovery options. And now you're just dictated on their pace as opposed to, I can get you back up and fast and quick, but now you're compromised completely. I don't know where in the chain of those backups is a good point in time because you killed all of my history. So that's the strategy's changing. I used to sometimes think as a managed service provider, put my MSP hat on and say, well, sometimes we're like firefighters with data protection. The system failed. I kicked the door down. I got you back up and running in an hour or two, and everybody was happy with that. The landscape's changed. It's now about attack. It's individuals who operate like businesses. They're running sprints, KPIs. These are very sophisticated groups now. Like I said, they just want to take out your backups and leave you in the dust. And if you can't pay, it seems like everything just gets deleted. So it's even worse.
Right. Yeah, and I think that that's the new avenue with a lot of the cyber breaches is about the data integrity and the data contents, right? Like we're looking at it right now and we're seeing that the actual amount of crypto where you come into your office and there's a note on the middle of your screen saying contact us and we'll get. We don't see too many of those anymore. What we're seeing now is, swaths of data that are missing and or they've been, sitting around for the longest time and they're picking out, files and contents within the customer's ecosystem. And while they're not paying attention, they're just kind of deleting content. Next thing you know, you're missing data and you don't even know what data you're missing. And I think that that is something that now is like, okay, well, how do I sort now what I'm missing and what they own and what they've taken away from me? Because they were very selective of taking financials or customer lists and stuff like that.
Yeah. And think about it sometimes this way, like data protection would say, did I save the data? Disaster recovery would say, how fast can I restore those systems? Business continuity, I should say, says, can my business operate during this chaos? If we're missing files somewhere, and you're right, that strategy is interesting because I'm just going to like chip away at little pieces of the business that I felt was important based on how I saw your data, financial data, HR data, important business information. And those missing chunks are difficult to find in a chaotic situation. And where companies get it wrong is that they're not investing first. Sometimes they're investing after the fact. And so, we don't necessarily go to the hospital until we have a broken leg. So we think about preventative medicine as well, too. And I think we have to apply the same theory to our security of our data as well. And that's where getting a good protection system in place and being more resilient is the strategy now. Because hope is not a good strategy for this.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting segue. Like when we look at it, what's the real impact to a business when your systems fail, like your backups failed, your securities fail? Like what is the real impact?
Yeah, and what we know when recovery fails, it's not an IT issue anymore. It's this is a business event, right? We have revenue halting, employees sitting idle, customers they start losing trust, leadership. We're in crisis mode now, right? And the kicker on this is most companies aren't dying from the actual attack; they fail because of the actual recovery window. And if you can't get your systems up running fast enough, that's not a recovery issue. That's just an extension of your failure that is persisting now. So that 2 to 5 day gap, that's where the damage starts to compound. And it compounds in the wrong way too. Like that negative interest is terrible. And in some organizations, we have board of directors who are calling and they don't call to say, well done. They're calling you because you're trending in the wrong direction. So that's something to be mindful about.
Yeah, and you mentioned something very keen on that. I find that, that point of recovery and, call it containment, there's got to be a new definition to this because I find that there's an expectation of zero where, you're hiring a cybersecurity firm, you're hiring a IT company, you're hiring even your in-house staff, and your expectations are is we're never going to go down. And I don't know if you heard this past week with Claude and the new version of Claude that was supposed to be released. Apparently, it's able to discover vulnerabilities in almost any network within seconds. And they had to actually pull that back, which is scary in one perspective. But, I tell my customers, and I'm like, if they're getting into Fortune 500s and they're getting into government sectors that have multi-million-dollar infrastructure and security, your setup has got to be best of breed. But at the end of the day, it's not about the best of breed security system, alarm system, security and aspects, and even your backup. I think it's also about how fast you can contain it, minimize the damage, and then be able to be back up and running. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Because at the end of the day, everybody is still susceptible. It's the question of if you got targeted by a hacker or one of these so-called businesses or a government entity and they decided to go after you, and then realistically I don't know how much you can do against it, but there's always a way when a hacker wants to get into your network. So it's a
Naturally.
different animal. Like I think we really have to really redefine what security and what means to be protected and back.
Yeah, I mean, you really got to contain that blast radius, right? I mean, that's key to to any sort of event because those would-be attackers are thinking about you missing a patch cycle, you being complacent, you being incredibly confident with the green lights on the dashboard, not doing regular testing, not doing regular validation processes, not having an incident response plan. That's what these attackers are planning on you being. And for most cases, when we see that, and many of the examples that I've experienced over the last decade or more, there was a lot of interesting similarities. There was gaps in communication, there was gaps in responsibilities, and there was gaps in their tool management. And sometimes I would have conversations recently about IT skill shortage. And the conversation, you might find this familiar, it's my opinion is it's shifted from people to actually the products themselves. We've got really smart people. There's just so much new data, new tools coming down the pipe that they're learning at a much different pace and managing all of these different environments with different tool stacks, with different expectations is can be tiring. So the IT skill shortage is not the people, it's the processes that are being prepared for them, and they're just not ready for it yet. So we are focusing in on training our teams, becoming smarter, more responsive, faster, working with AI, not as a tool to take over for us, but to enhance our experience so we can respond faster with better data, more intelligently, and get ahead of that bad guy, locking down backups differently, securing the network more efficiently, and looking for anomalies in places that we haven't looked before.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that response time and that time to containment is key and critical. We actually had a situation recently in our organization with a client who unfortunately clicked on a payload, but within 20 minutes, the team was able to respond, change the credentials, lock things out. Yeah, they were able to send out 50 or 100 emails from their mailbox, but we were able to contain everything within 20 minutes. Like everything was shut down. And so the customer was like, "Well, how did this happen?" I go, "Well, at the end of the day, they were pretty smart on the phishing. And as much as we've got, pretty state of the art phishing security services, call it best of breed, they were still able to get something through. And then the employee, accidentally clicked on it, even though they've got cyber awareness training. And then that payload was now, sending out spam messages to customers about, invoices and whatnot. But as soon as it was recognized and identified, the team was able to pounce on it, respond, work with the tool sets kicked in. And next thing you know, within 15 minutes, the threat was mitigated. And within 20 minutes, the customer basically was back to normal with minimal damage outside of reaching out to those individuals that got those fake emails. So, to me, that was a success. If it would have proliferated into a, full data loss, customers' data is compromised, the network was, completely shut down, that would have been a disaster. But at the end of the day, the proof was is that the systems worked, the tools were there, people were trained, and we were able to mitigate some of that threat body. So yeah, it's tough. You know what? I agree with you. There's no perfect solution. AI is only going to complement the teams and the resources that we have and the tool sets that we implement to our business. But you have to have the right mix and you have to have the right strategy. And I agree with you on that, being able to, build a strat plan, a response plan, whatever it may be, you need to make sure that those processes are in place and you test it because a lot of people talk about it, but never actually do a dry run and see what it looks like.
Think about some of the items that are going to kill your recovery. Right? Number one, no recovery testing. And even if you're automating it, it's one step more than doing a manual intervention. Some of my experiences would say, well, I'm going to automate daily, weekly, monthly, whatever that might be based on maybe some compliance or regulation that we're thinking about. I'm also thinking about periodic cycle checks. Jump into those test servers. See if the real reality is real. Under pressure, everything changes. And you do not want to be solving a math problem when the door is on fire. So that's a problem, right? And then we have slow architecture. Let's just be honest, right? If it takes recovery 2 or 3 days, that's a problem. And ransomware is just going to win in that regard, right? So think about your architecture as well. And then the false immutability, that belief that, oh, my backups are in the cloud, they're protected. Oh, that's great until that attacker deletes them. So that's something I'm really cautious about in my conversation. I like to share it in such a way that, I'm educating, but also not insinuating that there's a gap in their own abilities. I don't want to share it in such a way that sounds like I'm the smartest guy in the room, because I definitely do not want to be that guy. But it's good to surface the discussion with our IT leaders that we're making sure that these pieces are complete. Because when you set that forward into your incident response plan and you haven't done the groundwork, well, that incident response plan is not any good then. It doesn't, just because you wrote it down doesn't mean it's going to work. Test it until it gets boring.
Agreed, agreed. So, you're part of a massive organization. You service companies globally. So, one of my questions for you would be is sort of what do you guys see out there as a percentage of businesses that are successfully able to recover before they meet you? Like what's sort of that average today, Are we looking at 20% of companies are truly ready, or is it like, 80% of companies out there are truly ready? What do you see as sort of the call it the stats.
It's hard to put a percentage on, but I would say the large majority of the partners that I work with, in particular, I mean, North America is pretty heavy for me. I do a little bit of work in Europe as well too. They are definitely forward thinking, I would say. There's a lot of individuals like yourself, like myself, this is something that keeps us up at night. I've got 100 customers. I'm protecting not just their workstations, their servers, and their environments, but it's their data. And many of these business owners that I work with, much like yourself, it's legacy. You know, it's the legacy of your business. It's the reputation that you have in your space, as well as being the go-to person for data resilience, business resilience, security resilience, cyber protection. We used to joke, and I'm sure you've heard it as well too. You're only as good as your last mistake. We want to avoid the last mistake, because good enough is exactly what the last individual said just before their breach. And so don't let good be the enemy of great. It's okay to be a bit vicious with your process. It's okay to make sure that we're following a standard operating procedure. It's okay to document everything and be a nerd about it, because at the end of the day, that compromise will change you if you haven't been ready for it, if you don't have a recovery plan, because backup is easy and nobody's, saying backup is a challenge. Anybody can back things up. Recover, prove it to me, show me that you can do it, and do it regularly, and do it so often that boredom becomes your therapy.
That's an interesting perspective. Boredom becomes your therapy. I like that. Yeah, you know what? It's I'm more intrigued about when we kind of go to offices or we look at new prospects and clients. When was the last time you looked at it? And the perception is, oh well, when we set up our 365 or our Google or Azure or whatever cloud service, we set up a backup and or we thought that the data was being backed up by the vendor, and the reality is that wasn't done correctly or was never really set up. And on the flip side, I would say a majority of businesses out there, and I think I mentioned it earlier, the last time people looked at a disaster plan was during the pandemic, where
Mhm.
we still had offices, we still had businesses on prem. And so when everybody had to work from home, everybody said, well, wait a minute, we have to make sure that now everything's backed up in a different manner. But now people are going back to the office and the threat factors have changed, the software has changed, the technology has changed. So, like, this needs to be brought back up onto the table. And this leads me to my next question with you, is what are sort of the pitfalls or the mistakes that companies are making today when they're kind of planning or thinking about, how to redo their strat and their disaster planning?
Yeah. Well, if I'm a CEO today, I'm thinking about three things I want to lock in on. Immutable offsite backups. I don't think this is an option any longer. I need it to be always on, unconfigurable, untouchable by anybody. What that means is I have retention offsite that cannot be accessed, cannot be remotely connected to, has no visibility to any would-be attackers. My local copy could be a little bit of a canary in the mine in some examples, right? Whereby it traps would-be attackers. And sure, you can maybe delete my local, but you don't have my cloud. So I can mitigate my risk there. I need fast recovery, and I can't wait a few days from a restore. So that's the other piece I need to think about. Additionally, though, I also know that we're in a hurry up and wait model now, aren't we? When it comes to incident response planning, because we used to be able to get a server back up and running so fast and everybody was happy about it. But now I've got first responders, I've got insurance companies, I've got, security members who need to do forensics and auditing and all sorts of validation. So there's definitely a challenge to that, right? Because I can't give you well, I can give you the server. I can give it to you right now, but you can't access it and put it on a production network till all of those stakeholders said it's okay to go back live. So that's, capability under pressure is important, but we now are in a slightly different model. And I need to prove it. And it's not just screenshots, it's not just promises. I want evidence. And so my teams now are going to go out there and provide deeper analysis, deeper evidence into the recovery test validation process. I've given you screenshots, we checked a box. Show me it works in your tabletop quarterly, yearly, whatever that might be. But let's validate that that process actually can work end to end and that we can connect. So that's where my head's at from a sort of a top three non-negotiables in a if I'm the CEO making this journey happen today.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned something very, call it, new buzzword that everybody's kind of starting to use as a call it, I wouldn't say fear factor, but you use the word immutability, and I've heard also the word air gap backups. What are they? Like, can you explain that to the audience out there in the sense of that a backup is a backup? What is the difference between those two, three different types of backups that are being offered today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have that traditional, let's say, local only backup. That's basically a copy job or a type of rsync to a local copy available to you. You can offsite that. You want to push that into a cloud. That could be public clouds, Amazon, Google, Azure. Maybe we have a replication system where we're taking it offsite. Additionally, we want to think about immutability, air gap. And I think those two, they're very similar. Let's just consider them very similar in this example because those are the ones that can't be seen. That's locked in a storage array that isn't visible to production environments. Those are in a cloud. It could be your cloud. It could be another cloud. It could be a third party cloud. It could be a service that's providing immutability for you in an encrypted format that has only the capability to write to but not pull back from without security validation processes in place to pull that data out. It can't be visible to your dashboards or would-be attackers because we look at the model this way. Backups are managed through a dashboard somewhere in somebody's environment. Many dashboards have functionalities that you can turn on, governance mode or immutability mode or air gap mode. Well, that's a feature function. So as a would-be attacker, the minute I jump into somebody's dashboard, I'm looking for all of the functionality that I can disable. That's the first place I'm going to go. So I'm looking at your compliance stuff. And then I'm going to slowly chip away at all of your data. So once I've disabled your immutability, now I can disable your data. And now again, I just took your parachute away. Good luck on that fall. And so we want to look at things differently. When I say immutability, I don't want visibility. I don't want that anybody to see where that data actually resides in an immutable format. That is true immutability, in my opinion. Now, we can all accomplish that, by the way. It's very easy to do. You just have to find a service provider who's going to help you make that a reality for you. But that's a really good starting point from an immutability standpoint.
Yeah, and being in the industry for over 20 years now, I'm dating myself, geez. Not every product out there does this. So at the end of the day, when you look at a lot of platforms out there, backup is backup, and you kind of go back to the first two options where, all your emails are backed up in another service, or all your SharePoint or Google Drive data is backed up in another cloud service. But again, it's accessible through
Mhm.
that dashboard. So it's basically what we call replication, even if it is your server. And from what I know and what we and the vendors that we work with, not every vendor out there today has that extra layer as part of their offering. So it's definitely a conversation that if this is important to you, which I think every business should have some sort of, if it's not all your data, at least the critical data, is air gapped or immutable. And I think that that should be part of that equation today. And it leads me to another kind of conversation and saying critical data versus non-critical data. We're talking to a CEO today, and I talk to a lot of business owners and executives. What would you say today are, let's call it, non-negotiable for a data protection strategy, or call it, staying alive strategy?
Absolutely. I would think about incident responses. That's new-ish, let's say. It's not new in the essence of IT, but we were talking about incident response from a security standpoint. I'm thinking about incident response from data resilience and recovery standpoint, because it's no longer a broken processor, broken hard drive, or just an outage. This is an attack. And so we need to have all of our attack vectors aligned with our security tools, with our endpoint management tools, as well as our data resilience tools as well. And that alignment sits inside of your incident response plan. So I'm thinking incident response is the first thing out of the gate. Let's get it well defined. Let's throw it on paper. Let's put it into process, and let's start testing that. I'm looking at my recovery capabilities as well. I don't want to be rebuilding data over a few days. I was working with a CFO once who did not want his laptop backed up because they had feelings about the cloud. And I said, well, how long would it take you to rebuild those spreadsheets?
Uh,
And he said 3 to 4 weeks. I said, I'm assuming that's 3 to 4 months. He's like, yeah, maybe 3 to 4 years. And so we laughed about it. I laughed. He laughed. The cloud was giggling. And we all had a little bit of a fun time with that one. In the end, I had shown him the way and said, I think you just got to back this up to the cloud. Like, let's just start here, because recovery is not something we can just blink and make it happen. And then let's bring it back to that incident response plan. Let's actually hold ourselves accountable. Let's set regular testing cycles so that our teams are ready to respond. Because once we have immutability and we've checked that box, and once we have the plan in place, we've checked that box, and then we recover and look at the processes, let's just not stop there and say we're done, because we have to keep doing this monthly, maybe quarterly. Certainly, if you can do it, at least minimize it to once or twice a year, just to prove that you can do it. Because insurance, and you've probably experienced this too, insurance is involved now. And they're the people who are pulling the strings when it comes to, I need to file a claim. The business will file a claim. But did you do all the things that you were asked to do before this claim can be validated? And I've heard now that some claims are becoming invalidated because they didn't follow through on their standard operating procedure, or their incident response plan, or their data recovery testing, or their immutability commitments that they made. They thought good was good enough, and that's not good enough, as we know.
yeah, and that's an interesting one when you start talking about insurance and other vectors and factors around,
Yeah.
how you dealing with that, because we didn't even get into the conversation about compliance, because Canada is a little bit behind on compliance, but the rest of the world, we're seeing now more and more organizations are getting an ISO, a NIST, a SOC compliance. And then on top of that, you've got your cyber insurance. And then you've got clients now, if you are servicing in verticals like the Department of Defense, or you're doing financial services, and there's regulatory bodies now that are saying you need to meet these standards. And if you fail to do that, you're liable. And in Canada, we haven't seen a lot of that in the sense of having teeth yet, but in the US, there's teeth. I know in Quebec, I think last year there was a new bill that passed in Quebec that now makes people more liable than before, and you just can't say, "Oh, I didn't know." And I think that becomes another variable that people really need to start thinking about. Is I'm not just doing this for me; I have to do this now for everybody, and it is becoming now part of the equation.
I think you're right. I think all of the businesses collectively that we work with benefit when we have good process in place that we're following and aligning with, FedRAMP, NIST, or CMMC, these variety of different acronyms that are out there in the space, but are all related to security, monitoring, management processes. And you made an interesting point, and I think about it too. Some of these compliances, like PCI and others, it's a framework. And you have to align to the framework. And you then go out and say, we align with this framework. It's not a certification per se. It's a strategy that says we do those things too. And if you're not doing them and you fail, well, you're in a lot more trouble because you declared it. You said, I'm PCI compliant, but you kept putting, 16-digit MasterCard numbers on a spreadsheet on a local desktop, and you thought that was okay. And that's
Yes.
not. So this is a very small example, using it as something that, relatable to a lot of people. You scale that up into data handling and how it relates to federal government requirements. And I know we have a few of those in Canada as well that kind of parlay themselves into the US requirements, HIPAA, PIPEDA, things like that. And they both follow a very meaningful trend. They want to protect individuals' data. At the end of the day, if your doctor is using a Gmail account, have a nice conversation with them.
Yes.
Start there.
Yes, agreed. And for those that are listening and don't understand what these frameworks are and it sounds intimidating, they're not. It basically, Keith was alluding to this, like, so ISO, NIST, SOC, HIPAA, all these acronyms, it's really about, data integrity and a framework or a process that allows you to say, I'm following the best practices around securing my data, how it's being documented, and how everything is secured. And if there's an issue, it's recoverable. And these frameworks are there to build a standard. So most larger organizations today lean towards one framework over another. Europe has their sort of badges. North America has a different series of badges, medical and manufacturing, and so on and so forth. So they're all relatively the same once you start looking into it. There's just nuances that differentiate one over another. And so if you have one, to pivot and say, I need to have a second one is usually not, you're ripping the whole thing out and throwing it out the door. You're actually just bolting on a few extra features or a few extra, elements to your strategy. That would basically say, okay, now I've got more than one compliance framework set up in my business. So that's just for some clarity out there for people
Mhm.
that are not familiar with it, and sounds intimidating, but it's not as intimidating as it's perceived to be out there. Oh, Keith, this is really kind of for me, it's hitting home. I live and breathe this is almost 50% of what we do today. I'm really keen on it. I'd like to sort of see you know, what what do you see in the future? What's ahead? We've got cloud, we've got chat, we've got AI, we've got consolidation in the industry. We've got a whole bunch of disruptors happening right now. You talked about talent pool, human talent pool I'm talking about here. So we've got this convergence of all these things. What do you see evolving? How do you see 2026? I'm not talking 5 years out. That's just impossible to predict. But what would you say the next 24 months is going to look like for this whole aspect of data recovery and IT and all that stuff? What's your predictions?
I think it gets more automated. I think it's more targeted, and I think it's getting faster. And AI has a role to play in this, and we're all going to leverage it. And I think those who aren't going to tap into some sort of AI companionship for help are just going to be left behind. Those are the ones who will struggle because AI is accelerating attacks. It's personalizing them as well too, and it's shrinking those timelines. And when I mean shrinking those timelines, if the striker attack is anything to go on, there wasn't a warning. There's no fireworks. There's no bells. They went in, they deleted, and they left. And that's impactful, right? And the amount of time to recover needs to be faster. We also need to automate that as well, too. And we've got to consider testing more aggressively and more consistently throughout the life cycle. We can't just rely on a once a year validation test any longer. I think we need to not improvise, we need to improve because those threat landscapes are starting to shift gears a little bit. AI is a huge component of that. I'm obviously incredibly late to AI attacks. I wish I had gotten in sooner and hooked up with some interesting characters a long time ago. That never happened for me. So here I am helping fight against it instead. And I'm much better positioned for it because I think this is the right place to be as well. And want to just accelerate the AI conversation a little bit further as well too, because it is playing a vital role in data protection, data resilience, simply because it can operate at machine speed. There's no fatigue. And so when we think about anomaly detection, looking at those attack vectors that are coming through, we have our endpoint detection tools, our managed detection response tools. They're doing a fantastic job. But at the end of the day, you highlighted something that sat with me a little bit. Somebody clicked something. It's going to be that human curiosity that will always reign supreme when it comes to these attacks now. And they're waiting on somebody to say, oh, that looks interesting. What is that? And click. Even with all the best tools, those phishing tools that we have built into our Outlook assignments, somebody's clicking yes to something. And this is not good news for businesses. And there's no way to really stop that outside of training. And even with the best training, we're still having individuals click on those links. And I've experienced them recently too. In fact, one of my colleagues in the office clicked on a link that was a phishing setup in our test mechanism. And I said, "Did you do that on purpose just to see what happened?" They're like, "No, actually, it spoofed me." That is good. That's helpful. We learned that from that one for sure. So
Hmm.
do additional testing, get the groundwork laid out. And it's all about the people, the processes, and the outcomes now. I mean, you can have the best tools on the bench, but if someone in accounting has clicked that button, we're in trouble.
Yeah, no, definitely. I am going to say that 90% of where we're going to be, if not in the higher 90s, all security breaches at one point will pretty much be um, on the human side. When we look at AI versus AI, we're already seeing vendors and manufacturers incorporate AI to do immediate response and threat detection and mitigation. And, the algorithm is evolving rapidly. And on the flip side, obviously hackers are using AI to create those tools at the same pace. So, it's going to be that AI versus AI, which is great. At some point in time, it's just going to be who's got the better AI algorithm. But when we look at the human element, we're going to see new targeted campaigns that we've never ever seen before between like real time texting and emails that look like it's coming from the boss, like not no longer, I'm at a meeting right now. Can you send an Amazon gift card to the following information? That was yesterday's news. We're gonna see. We actually got one that almost came through. It made it 50% of the way. They had cloned an email address, created a domain name, made it look like legit, like everything. Like I was sending an email back and forth, agreeing to a contract. And at the end of the day, they basically forwarded an invoice with me as a string saying that I agreed to pay the invoice, and they sent it to my accounting department. Fortunately, we have a multi step process that, I'm not going to share, but we have a multi-step process that has to go through multiple verification before anything gets paid out. The interesting part was that they got all the way to the point where they had like seven emails back and forth. Yeah, I love the proposal. They have somehow got the signature and everything. And I'm like, that's pretty, that was a lot of work to kind of go through and create all of that and generate it and find all the communication and such and then send off a fake invoice. So yeah, it was very smart. And I can only imagine now what we're going to see with video and audio and, with AI being able to replicate a lot more than what we perceive today. It's going to be very scary. But at the same time, companies like yours and others will create new technology to help identify and mitigate that threat.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be scary. I mean, if you have the right pieces in place, you can get your way through it, right? I mean, it is scary to those who are on the other side of it, of course, and those who don't have experience like ourselves. And we obviously will take the time to educate and help our partners learn a little bit more about security that we're assuming, they see a lot of things on television or read a headline of an article and it gives you some, anxiety perhaps. And, with IT leaders like ourselves will go out and explain the impact of not doing an assessment, of not putting the right tools in place. And sure, there's a cost attached to it. And it's not really always about selling tools any longer. It's about focusing on these great outcomes that we want to deliver on as opposed to, yeah, I sold you $100 worth of licensing that you can't tell because isn't tangible. There's no lights, but it is actively working to protect your environments. Trust me on this. I can give you reports every day if you like, but that's the life we're living in right now too.
For sure. And from a business standpoint, I want to know, how do you see cyber insurance and, call it disaster planning, call it backup standards, all that stuff. Like, how do you see that kind of possibly connecting or being forced on one to another? Because I know that people are scared about getting cyber insurance, or some people are getting cyber insurance, but they really don't understand what they're signing up for. And so, like, do you have any predictions on how things are kind of progressing with that and what factors people need to consider when they're looking at cyber insurance and how their
Oh,
business
yeah.
being affected?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's already shifting from do you have backups to prove you can recover. And that's the big thing out of the gate already. They're going to force us to better standards. It's going to force us to prove testing and really force us into managing our recovery SLAs. And I think that's a really good thing, honestly. I think it's incredibly helpful that they're available to us there. Maybe we all are a little bit reluctant or hesitant when it comes to insurance, right? I don't want to make a claim, or I don't want to call my insurance company because I'm worried about my rates. And those are valid concerns. But in this example, it's going to be key to forcing better practice. And that's beneficial for everyone.
Cool. I appreciate that one. A couple last questions here, and we're coming up to the top of the hour for us here. So quick ones here. Number one, what would you say is a myth about backup you want to kill?
Having backups means you're safe. It doesn't.
I love that one. That is so true. So true. All right. Next question I got for you, an easy one here. Or actually, this one may be one of the big ones here. So every CEO, business owner should be asking either their IT provider or their IT person today. What should they be asking them?
Show me how fast we can recover. Don't just tell me.
That's a good one. That is definitely a good one. All right. Last question. And this one completely, I call it from the heart. I kind of throw it out there. If there's one thing business owners can take away from this podcast, what is the one action they can do today or this week to better protect their business?
Look and see if you have an incident response plan. And if you don't, start one right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that every business out there should take a step back and do that. I challenge everybody out there, even if it's a one pager, perception on that. The business incident response plan does not need to be a textbook. Just to clarify that, it's, what systems are we using? Is it documented? What is our backups that we have? What's our process to recover? And what is the time to recover? Those could be as simple as a one pager, and who's responsible for it, what numbers you're calling, are we calling insurance? What's the tipping point on that? And who are the people that are involved in that incident response time? It's literally a 1 to 2 pager. It is not a textbook. You don't need to spend $50,000 to put one together. To me, that just for people out there that are thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to spend big bucks or put something together that's going to take me time. It literally can take an hour to put something for a small business. It could be an hour's worth of effort to get your management team and your IT person in the room to do that. And I think that just having that on a piece of paper or somewhere that everybody knows where that is, that's already better than nothing. So that's a good one. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah. You said it well, too. It doesn't have to be elaborate 400-page document. It's a 1 or 2 pager of who to call, what systems are at risk, and what are we going to do when the fire hits.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Keith, I want to thank you for coming out to our podcast. It was incredible to have you on our show this time. I hope you enjoyed your interview.
I did. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to have this conversation. It's something I talk about pretty much every day, every hour. So I was ready.
You were ready. That's it. It was right in your wheelhouse. So I want to thank all of the listeners out there. If you please like and subscribe. We're always looking for amazing speakers. So if you know anybody, please feel free to reach out. Beyond the Firewall right now is growing tremendously, and our listeners and viewers are really engaged. We're getting a lot of comments. We're really excited about the direction of this podcast. So looking forward to possibly getting you guys back out and talking about some offense and other things that are going on in the industry. Keith, I want to thank you again for being on our show. Really pleasure having you on it, and looking forward to getting you back in the future for another episode.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
All the best. Thank you, everybody. Have yourself a great day.